called into my family meeting in the living room in Memphis, Tennessee, and was introduced to a man named Mr. Follin, and was told that I was going to be coming to Webb School. That was my introduction. Well, yes, it was very rustic, which to me added a lot to its appeal. But in those days we had the big room, which sat on the hill behind us over here. And it was a barn-type building, but it would seat 200 students or thereabouts, with a very sparse raised platform where the faculty would attend. Each class was conducted in one of the outbuildings, what we now know as the senior room and junior room, but we had several others, all of them heated by pot-bellied stoves, coal burning. I remember that much about it. Those classrooms did not have desks and did not have seats. They had benches, and they would have a bench that would be perhaps as long as from me to this gentleman over here, that would maybe seat 12 students, and they were stacked up. I'm going in some detail because you might get it, will get into this later. But one of the principal teaching techniques at Webb in 1941 was what we call trapping. And it was my first experience at teaching by trapping. And I can state from personal experience that it is a very effective way to teach. And for those that are not familiar with trapping, you would line up each morning in taking the seat that you vacated the day before. So if I was in the number 1 seat, I sat in number 1, number 2, 3, 4, 5, so. If it was, say, mathematics, Mr. Raker, who was the mathematics professor, asked a question that required a demonstrable, identifiable answer. He would ask number 1. Number 1 missed, he'd say next, and ask number 2. If number 2 missed, he'd say next. Number 3 missed, he'd say next. If number 5 got it, number 1, 2, 3, and 4 all went around to the back of them, and number 5 moved up to the number 1 seat, and so on. So that at the end of the day, he wrote down where you were, and everybody knew who was number 1 in the class, because he was the person who sat in the number 1 seat most often. And but it took a lot of mystery out of it, I'll tell you that, and it was, you had to be ready. So I'm digressing, but the campus were all buildings similar to what we now call the junior building. And we had 2 dormitory buildings that were the newest buildings on campus, and they were situated where the dining room is now. And those were, I guess they would take 10 or 12 students on each floor, two floors. And I can't remember how many students they would accommodate, but those were the ones that lived on campus. And then we always had students that lived in family homes in Belleville. You don't forget Bell Buckle as a first impression, because it's probably the smallest, most rural city you'll ever see in your life. So when you're brought to Bell Buckle as a 14-year-old, and that's what you drive through on the way to Webb School, you begin to have a little apprehension. But that's my first experience. The headmaster, when I arrived at Webb School, was Will Webb, well, the one they called Son Will Webb. The assistant headmaster was Webb Follin. And Mr. Follin was the real head of the school. He and Son Will, I'm sure, worked very closely together, but our contacts and the administration's contacts with the students were largely through Mr. Follin rather than through Son Will. As an example, when we would have chapel every morning, the principal person conducting the chapel service would be Mr. Follin, not Mr. Webb. But so I would say Son Will was the headmaster, Webb Follin was the virtual headmaster. Very easy question. World War II. So that was everything that was going on. Well, it impacted it, but it didn't have any influence on the education I received. You had all of the inconveniences that are associated with World War II, particularly the early years. Gas rationing, sugar rationing, food rationing, rubber rationing, automobile rationing, so that I guess the principal inconvenience, if you would, was that you were restricted in most of your activities because of government appropriation of whatever the material was that you needed to use. Also, it had the added impact that didn't affect us directly so much, but the draft was in effect. So the colleges were emptying, and the Army was full of people who had gone to college and spent 1 year and then been drafted, or spent a year and a half and then been drafted. And the college campus themselves were very empty, if that's of any consequence. Well, I did go to college after I graduated from Webb School. I graduated in June of 1943, and I entered Vanderbilt in June of 1943. And I think there was 1 week between my graduation and my freshman, because the schools in those days were operating 12 months a year, and they needed students, and all of the students were draft age, so it was all of the prospective students were draft age. So when I got to Vanderbilt, if that's your question, it was a wonderful time for me because I had so much more freedom there than I had at Belleville. And when I say freedom, I'm really speaking of social freedom. And I loved it. I didn't learn all that much, but I loved it. And but in any event, we were taking a normal college curriculum, but it had to be focused on freshman subjects. I can go into some detail about that, but if you want me to. But the honor code was very strong, and that was not only the first thing you learned when you matriculated at Webb, but it was a strong influence on your early education and on your lifestyle. I don't know how familiar you are with the honor code, but this is anecdotal, but it is my understanding that Webb was the first educational institution to implement an honor code. And it worked so successfully that Princeton adopted it, and then other Ivy League schools adopted it, and now I think all schools use it. But its origin was Webb School, and the administration of Webb School in 1943 was trying to live up to that reputation, and was therefore highly focused on the honor code. One of the beauties of the honor code, in my judgment, is that it is student enforced. And I was chairman of the honor council in my senior year, and we had to ship a boy. And Mr. Webb and Mr. Follett didn't call him in and send him home. We called him in and sent him home. And that's a pretty heavy responsibility for a teenager. Well, I'm going to reverse it on you.
Okay.
My favorite teacher was Mr. Follett. And he taught third year Latin, which was Ovid. And he taught American history, or some English literature. But not only was he my favorite teacher, he was the best teacher I had at Webb, and he was the best teacher let me back up a little bit. I have been to a lot of colleges, and I have been to Yale Law School. Mr. Follett was the best teacher I ever had anywhere in my college experience, at any school. So I have a very high regard for him. We didn't leave campus much at all, and the reason we didn't was because of the war. You couldn't go down the station and buy a ticket on a train. You had to have a priority in order to get home, so you couldn't get home. And we didn't have cars, so you couldn't go to Murfreesboro, or I guess you could get to Shelbyville, but I just soon be in Bell Buckle. But we were very much committed to campus life. I came. Christmas break was a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, and spring break the same. And there was no, it was standard as far as that's concerned, but still transportation was a problem.
Okay.
Blue jeans, sweaters. We were not required to wear a coat and tie. You know, I always enjoyed athletics, so whatever athletic activity we were performing, I enjoyed doing. But in those days, Webb didn't have interscholastic athletics. We didn't play other schools. All we did was have intramural athletics, and it was very competitive. And I enjoyed that part of it, but it was like sandlot baseball. You played with who you had, and but that part of it was fine. And the only outside activity that comes to my mind is hiking, and I can go into a little detail on that, but it's not anything I think of much consequence. But we did explore the country around Bell Buckle to the point that it's still one of my favorite spots as far as the atmosphere and the rural atmosphere in this part of the world. The thing that was most impactful was influence, the very significant influence that my experience at Webb School had on my future life. And I could go into some serious detail on that if you would like, but that is the thing that I most remember about Webb. It's the thing that's, of course, stuck with me if I remember it. But it's the thing that I consider to be the most important as Webb's educational objectives. And it was the thing that when I was chairman of the board, I spent most time protecting. And it's not all, that wasn't always easy. You don't know what I mean. You quizzical when I say protecting. As a principle of Webb, when I say you're trying to protect the education, I mean you're trying to keep it from being eroded so that it develops into the type of an education that all secondary schools are offering. And we didn't want that. We had a different vision for what a education at a rural secondary school in the hills of Middle Tennessee stood for. And we tried to do the best we could to keep that from being eroded. For example, you don't sell out to the highest bidder, the person who's supposed to give you the most money. You take the child of a strong supporter of the school and are educating him, and he breaks the rules. You don't wink it. You don't connect his heritage from his conduct, and you expel him if it's an expellable offense, even though his father may be publisher of the Nashville Tennessean, and that happened. So it wasn't a Nashville Tennessean; it was a Nashville Banner. But anyway, it's that's what I meant when I say we protect it. My objective is easy. In that respect, I will serve at Webb in any capacity in which they ask me. But it's not because I'm a trustee or an ex-chairman or anything else. When I was trustee and when I was chairman, people would come to me and say, Jim, you know, you're important. Webb owes you a lot for what you're doing. And my response is always the same. Webb doesn't owe me. I owe Webb School. And as long as I genuinely feel that way. And as long as, that's what I'm trying to protect.
To be honest, I wasn't given a whole lot of choice in the matter. My father and his two brothers had all come to Bell Buckle, and I was told that was where I was going. Up to that point, I'd been going to public schools, and I guess it was always kind of expected that I would go to Bell Buckle, so I did. Great. The campus was similar to what I see around today. There were a lot less of the new buildings. 2 dorms sitting on the hillside as you come in from the east. The Rand Hall, where the cafeteria is now, was considered the new dorm, and that's what we called it. That's all we ever called it, was the new dorm. There were 3 outbuildings, including where the admissions office used to be the old administration building, and that's where the administration was. The chapel wasn't here. The big room was in the building over here, and now they've since paved over where the big room was. I do remember that the big room had wooden seats, and they were the most uncomfortable seats I ever sat in. And they made us come sit in there one night, and they were really uncomfortable. I forget what the reason was why we were there for that evening, but they were uncomfortable that night. There was a dorm on the other side of the soccer field that was separated from everybody else. And it was an old building that held 6 or 7 people, and those people had to go there after dinner, and it was a long way away. Downtown was equally as bleak as it is now. Miss Jean's was the first place you could get to going down the hill, I guess where the Bluebird is now. And you would go down there, that's where the mailbox was, so you would go to get your mail and you would stop for ice cream at Miss Jean's. And amazingly enough, there was a little hamburger grill in the basement of a house on one of the first 2 houses coming in on the left, and I think the guy's name was Al. And you could go over there and get a hamburger if you decided that dinner was not to your liking after dinner was over. His full name was Henry O. Whiteside. We always called him H.O. Whiteside. And he impacted me by being a really strong leader. He was in charge of the school. And he was always in charge of the school. He was always around. He walked with a very, I've never seen anybody walk with the same gait that H.O. walked, but he walked briskly from building to building and from location to location. He was I would never consider him somebody that was a friend. He was always the boss, and you always knew that he was in charge. And he impacted me by, I've thought about H.O. a lot over the last 50 years. And, I'm always a little bit sorry that I didn't get to see more of him after I left Bell Buckle, but I can't honestly say that I ever saw him again. Kind of strange. Civil rights was a big thing. JFK died, was assassinated 2 years before I came to Webb. Martin Luther King was assassinated in my last year in Bell Buckle. The Vietnam War was ramping up. There was a possibility of the draft. They didn't institute the draft until we actually left Bell Buckle. But it didn't really impact us. I mean, we were isolated. I mean, you know what Bell Buckle is like. I mean, we're away from everywhere else. So what happened in the rest of the world, we didn't see a lot of. And you got to remember one other thing. There was no television back then. Most of our entertainment came over the radio. It did not come over. So what we heard were voices from elsewhere to tell us about what's going on. But it wasn't something that we saw every day. We were aware of it, but it was non-participatory, if you want to put it that way. Joe Whiteside, I'll be honest, he taught American history, and I went to Dartmouth after I left here, and I had American history, and I had history courses, and I had some really good teachers. A man named Louis Morton, who was very well known at the time, was a teacher. H.O. Whiteside taught the best American history course I've ever had. And to tell you a story that goes along with that, years after I left Dartmouth, I went back for a CPA. In order to CPA, I had to get a second degree. And the state of Tennessee had a requirement back then, 40 years ago, that you had to have 2 American history courses in order to graduate. And I'd only had 1 American history course. I got almost a minor in history, but I only had 1 American history course. So I took a second American history course from what is now the University of Memphis, what was back then Memphis State University. 2/3 of the way through the class, my teacher came up to me and said, "Why are you in this class?" And I said, "I'm in this class because the state of Tennessee says I have to have an American history course." And we talked about it for a little bit longer, and then we come up time for the final exam, and she calls me up to the desk and says, "Don't come to the final exam." And I said, "Okay, but why not?" And she said, "Because I can make a test that will test your knowledge and flunk everybody else that's in this class. Or I can make a test that is tough on them, for which you will get the A that you're already going to get right now." And I credit that all to H.O. Whiteside. He taught American history, and I knew American history. The honor code was everything in Bell Buckle. I also was on the honor council, but only made it my senior year. We were students together, 1 freshman, 2 sophomores, 3 juniors, and 4 seniors. And it was our job to monitor the infractions of the other students. I do not know I can't remember whether we ever recommended the expulsion of a student, but we had that ability. And I know that over the 4 years, there were students expelled because of honor infractions in each of those 4 years. I'm not sure whether we did. I believe we did it in at least 1 case in my senior year. It permeated everything you did in Bell Buckle. You were always aware of it. You couldn't stop when you walked outside your room at night. If you were going from point A to point B, you had to go from point A to point B. You couldn't stop. A funny story that I tell on myself is you weren't supposed to stop. In my freshman year, I sleptwalked, and I actually walked out the door and realized that I was walking outside and walked around the building and walked in the front door, walked out the side door and walked back in the front door, and never stopped walking. But when I woke up from the sleepwalk situation, I knew exactly that I had the possibility to be in an honor code infraction, and didn't. So even as a freshman, it went that deeply into it that I kept on walking. Couldn't leave campus. You could get away if you asked for permission. I went to see my grandmother. They came down. My grandmother lived in Nashville, and I think I went to them one Saturday. We could get away on Saturday. We wore coats and ties, not every day, but more than I had planned on. We had a Saturday morning review back then, and we would, from 8 in the morning to 11 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning, we had to study in our rooms. And we were checked on. And I guess this is as good a place as any to interject this part of it. HO put in a system called the prefect system. And prefects were seniors who lived in the dorms and were kind of the dorm monitors, the dorm leaders. And we had the prefect system for all 4 years that I was in the school system. There was always a kind of a curious situation about who was going to be named a prefect for the senior year, because there was only seniors, it was not anybody else. And HO held it close to his vest as to who he was going to do it. And there was always a senior prefect. And you never really knew. The senior prefect was the guy who was basically in charge of all the students. And we had a great senior prefect, although I was never quite sure why they selected the fox to be in charge of the hen house.
You want to state who that person was?
A man named George Pine.
Okay.
I always look back to my Webb education as probably the best. I was one of the most educated people that went off to college. Okay. And I add to that, and it's not something I realized while I was in Bell Buckle, but something I realized after I came back from Bell Buckle, is that I had spent 4 years of my life with what ended up being 24 other graduates. And I was probably closer to that group as brothers than I was to anywhere else. And the friends that I made in that high school, in this high school, were friends for life. They weren't short-term friends. And the people I met in college, I still talk to them every once in a while, but the people I met in Bell Buckle, we got shared experiences that no one else can imagine, and it made for a very solid class. There's no other way to put it.
And these were students from across the country and around the world?
The McKay brothers were twins from Venezuela. We had people from across the country, from I won't say 25 people, not all 50 states, but from most of the regions. We had New Yorkers and Midwesterners, we had Westerners. There was a lot of people from Tennessee. The McKay brothers, as I say, were from Venezuela. We were from all over, and we melded as a group. And the reason I want to talk about it is when I look out over and think about Bell Buckle, I think about 100 students, all boys. That's what it was. They were there. We had maybe one girl who was an 8th grader, I think, in my senior year, who was the daughter of one of the teachers. There were no girls on campus. There were no girls around Bell Buckle. We went to one dance down in Birmingham in, I guess, my sophomore year. I'm not completely sure. And where we went to a girls' school. That was it. So there is a big change between the Bell Buckle of today and the Bell Buckle back then. The other big change is out of that 100 students, 90 or 95 of the students were boarders. There were very few day students, very, very few day students. And any day students that we had were either children of the teachers or lived in Bell Buckle itself. So those are two big changes that back 50 years ago, that's a change from today. And that's it. You're welcome.
Wait a second. Ask you what he called the day students.
Okay, what did you call the day students?
I forget what we called the day students.
Oh, no.
Well, look, it's an old memory, and I've lost it. I cannot.
Miranda, they called us townies.
They did, but you have to understand that my roommate came from Shelbyville, but he was a four-year boarder. And Charles Alexander lived in Shelbyville, but he was a four-year boarder. So, yes, they were townies. You're right. I remember that.
Well, it wasn't. I came to Webb in 1987. I was 12 years old, so it wasn't like it was a whole lot of my decision. But it was interesting, and how it happened is that my family just got back from vacation, and we were walking through the Nashville airport, and Webb had a indoor billboard advertising, and so we walked by. My mom saw that. My twin sister saw that, kind of jokes that would be a great place for you to go. And I think literally within 2 weeks of seeing that, I was enrolled at the Webb School. I toured on a Friday, and I was moving in on Tuesday. It all happened very quickly. But to back up, it really wasn't for me it had been a tradition in our family to go to boarding school. Usually it happened around the freshman year. I started a little early. You'll have to ask my parents why. But no, I came here, I was barely 12 years old, and 1987, and my mom dropped me off, and I ran off and made friends, was having a good time, and she drove home and said she cried the whole way. So they thought that this would be something, an experience to kind of show me and help me grow up, and I instantly loved it. And so it's something she always talks about a great deal. Campus in 1987 to 1993 really looked a lot like it does today, and which for me in coming back is always one of the nicest parts, is that Webb is my home. I grew up here, and to come back and see that a lot of things are still the same is one of the reasons why I love to come back. My first year here in 1987, the science building had just come online. So we had a brand new science building, science and math building, and we had the big room, looks just like it does today, the administration building. We had Rand, we had Chambliss. We did not have the Barton Gymnasium, but the Han Ragland was where we had all the basketball games. We actually had a pool back then, and where all the locker rooms and weight rooms were. And and I think by my senior year, that was the year they dedicated the library. So most of our years, we took a lot of our tests. We had classes in the O-Librario. And that's really where everybody kind of congregated back then, because we also didn't have a student center. And so really the library in the big room is really where people congregated. So we're really never too far from a book.
Okay, and where did you live?
My first year, I lived in Rand dormitory, and 7th grade, and my 8th grade to senior year, I lived in Chambliss. And it used to be an upperclassman dorm. My 8th grade year, they decided to make it an honor dorm. And so if you were on honor roll, you would have the privilege of living in Rand. I think at one point it got down to about 8 or 9 students over there, so we never saw the honor dorm again. But it was. But then by the time I got a freshman, then I had my spot there. So that is where I lived and spent 6 years. Sure. Yeah, it was. When I got here, I think my first year it was about 240 students, and we usually were anywhere between 210 to 240, I think, during the time I was here. So it's smaller than it is today, but we were 7th through 12th grade at that time. There was not a 6th grade. And it really was, and for me coming to Webb as a 12-year-old, I grew up in Nashville, originally from Boston, so I moved down south, and as I call it, I went more rural every time and ended up in Bell Buckle. But, for me, it was really the first time to meet students from all over the world. And I think when I got here, we not only had students from a number of different states, much like today, it drew from the region, Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky, South Carolina. We had students from Florida, Texas, and then out west in California. as well as from the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states as well. So you drew from a pretty wide area, but we also had a number of international students, which, we had students from Japan, Korea, South Korea, Thailand, Spain, Germany, Greece, Ethiopia. I mean, really from all over the world. And for me, it was really the first exposure I ever had to meeting people from other countries. And being a boarder, you not only were able to meet them, but I lived with some of these students. And so for a young kid who hadn't really been out, who hadn't traveled much or been outside, it really coming to Webb really, I always say kind of opened up the world a little bit. It gave you perspectives, and you met people from other countries, and that taught you about who had different ideals and different backgrounds and traditions. And for me, it was always very interesting to see that and to meet people. I was curious. I wanted to travel, and so Webb was really, I think, really the starting point in really opening up the world and meeting other people. And I think from that developed an interest in languages, and I think that exposure was probably one of the more profound experiences or influences on me while I was at Webb. Yeah, well, I'll start the dress code's a little different. We wore shirt and tie all year round. And in fact, I think in 8 days from now, we would be getting ready to wear our sport coats. November 11th, Armistice Day, Sonny Webb's birthday. And it was always the day that we would put the jackets on. I can't remember when we took them off, when it ended, when in spring, or I think when it's springtime, maybe when it started getting warmer, we were relieved of having to wear them every day. But the coat and tie was really something that I remember from Webb. And no uniforms, it was, everybody had their own different ties and, shirts. And so that was something I think that's a lot different than then. For campus life and being a boarder, as I mentioned, my first year we didn't really have a student center, but we had Miss Jean's downtown. And so, a lot after school and on the weekends, we would all go walk downtown. We had the diner. It was not really what the cafe is today. It was more of a greasy kind of spoon, but we still loved it. We would go down there, and I think my second year they opened up the student center, and so we had somewhere to go. But really, I think it was a TV, 3 bean bags, and a ping pong table. But it was all right though. I mean, it was nice to have, and we had a gym, and we played basketball on the weekends. We always had a lot of pickup games. We had a lot of games we invented. There was a game called soccer tennis. And I think we did a demonstration a few years ago to showing the people, you could only do it in Chambliss. And it was only the little courtyard outside of the TV room in the kitchen where you could play this game. And we would have just very, very intense tournaments. And anybody who lived in that dorm from 88 to 93 would remember this game and probably their teammate and where they stood at the end of the year. But, I think being in this more rural setting, I think it taught you to be more creative and to, I always felt like we had plenty to do. I don't ever remember being bored. In fact, when we were at reunion last year, we talked, it was a rainy day, and it was funny, you could hear people from all the different decades talking about, you remember when it rained? You remember when we'd go mudsliding down the Dell, and we would play tackle football on soccer fields? And, it was funny just, because what are you going to do in Webb when, on the weekends and the weather's not so good? But, I think even just, despite the weather or whatever, I always remember having a good time and having fun and having a lot of friends and people to do it with. But we were allowed to go away on the weekends. You could go home with a student. Fridays you could take accounting after school. Depending on what grade you were in, would dictate what time you had to come back. I think seniors could come back at 11. Seniors could have cars. Juniors could as well, but they couldn't go on counties. They could only use them to go home. And so hopefully you knew a senior, if you weren't one, that had a car. And you would go out, and then and on Saturdays you could take counties as well and be gone, go for the day, and go to Murfreesboro, Nashville, or other people's houses. So aside from that, and then we had a student, I guess somebody who's in charge of activities. And so we had mall trips, movie trips. There was always something going on, and there's really always, and the other faculty members always seem to be involved too, and just taking you to high school football games. And so yeah, never really lacked for anything to do. So when my kids say they're bored, I don't have any sympathy for them these days, because it's a different world. And to give really sort of one last thing I'll add about this is, For a digital frame of reference, when I was here, we had a payphone to make call. We had to call our parents to collect calls from a payphone outside in Chambliss. And I didn't have email until I was a senior in college. I didn't use the internet until I was a senior in college. And I didn't have a cell phone until I was 22. And I was one of the first people to have one. In my peers. So just for the millennials and Generation Zers, I think is what they are. That's a digital frame of reference of what we didn't have any of that back then. So that's a tough one, only because I'm fortunate that a number of my teachers are still here on campus, which I think is one of the reasons I love coming back here. It's a testament to Webb, a testament to their commitment to the school, and so it'd be hard to answer that. But I guess since none of them are in here right now, I would say, look, when I went to college, Davidson College, which I can touch on in a minute as to why I went there. Webb was one of the big reasons. Instead of naming names, I'll put it this way. I have a bachelor's in history. And that history degree is in large part to two teachers who are still here this day. Today I work in finance, and I do commercial real estate investments. And you would think history is the farthest, wouldn't have any relevance for what I do today, but I'd have to say, from what I learned at Webb and learning how to write and learning how to get in front of people and speak are probably more valuable for what I do today than having an MBA. So that's something I've always been grateful for Webb, because you find as you even in graduate school and here in the business world, finding people who can truly write, who can write a concise paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 3, or even be able to get that information and to deliver it verbally is challenging for a lot of people. So I would think I've probably made more I've probably made more progress in my career because I could write a paragraph than because I knew finance, or that I could use the Hamada equation on, it's really funny in looking back in terms of when you look at the skills you acquire and then the ones that you use. And and I think stepping back and looking now and seeing that there's probably more I did and learned at Webb that's more relevant to what I do today. The honor code, it does. It's a part of the everyday, the Webb life. It does. It permeates everything. It's always in everybody's mind. And it was something I liked where and I wrote an essay for college about this, where you could drop your wallet and you could find it the next day in the spot where you left or where you had dropped it. And so I was on the Honor Council 5 out of the 6 years I was here, 8th grade through my senior year. And when I went to college, I went to Davidson College in North Carolina. And one of the biggest reasons I went is that I felt like it was a little bit bigger version of Webb. In fact, you had to write a pledge, an honor pledge on your homework, which was or homework, test, everything. That was verbatim of what we wrote here. And so for me, it was easy. I was so used to doing this for 6 years and just writing that pledge at the top. And they had a very strict honor code, and it was the same thing where I've seen it. People would drop things or left things, and they will always be there. You can put your backpack down, you can put your bike up and not have to lock it up and not worry about anything happening to it. And I think that was when I toured Davidson, that was one of the things that really appealed to me. It was just the strength of the honor code and the students, though. I think you see the people that if you're here at Webb, then that's something that you want to be a part of. And I think at Davidson, having the honor code being a big part of your everyday life. So for me, it was a great transition, and I think it was just a testament to how much I believed and ascribed to that what I had here at Webb, and wanted a similar environment when I left.
Okay.
For my middle school years, I went to a private school, and one of the admissions representative came to my school and did a presentation. And it just so happened that I was looking at boarding schools the end of my 6th grade year, but I wasn't really sure when I wanted to start a boarding school. And it came around to 8th grade year, and I was like, well, I remembered that Miss Ellie Yates came my 7th grade year, and she did a presentation, and I was like, I definitely want to apply there. And then when I came to visit, I fell in love with the campus. We have a lot of new buildings. Actually, when I came here my freshman year, we didn't have our new dorms. They were built a couple years ago. So we have our 2 new senior dorms, and we still have Chambliss and Rand and Davis and Cooper Ferris, which are younger kids, and Rand is just 10th grade girls. And Chambliss is the older boys, except for seniors. We still have the junior room. Mr. L.R. Smith teaches in there history and ethics. We have a new student center also, so we use the old student center as an alumni center. And the old library is still Mr. Jones' classroom in the new library. And then the big room is still here also.
All right. Can you discuss the makeup of the students from worldwide to nationally?
Here we have a lot of diversity. We have students from all over the place, from a lot of different countries and states. We have them from Bahamas, Lithuania, Germany, Russia. We had some from Japan while I was here. And it's just great to have that diversity because you get to see like a whole new part of the world and just kind of opens your eyes to different cultures. And we have some nights where I'll be in the dorm and I'll smell just a bunch of just Chinese food, and the Chinese students and the teachers will get and they'll be cooking some meal, and I'll have never even tried it before. And I'll just walk up and they'll offer me some food, and it turns out that I really love it, and it's just a great experience. Well, we wear a uniform. Girls can wear pants or skirts, and guys wear slacks or shorts with a button-up that has Webb School on it and a tie. The only day that we get kind of a dress-down day is for Fridays, and we get to wear a polo, but it's still like in uniform. And then for seniors, once we get our blazers on Fridays, we can kind of wear what we want to within the dress code, but we have to wear our blazers with it. Well, for us, we have many opportunities. We have things from mock trial to all different types of sports to ACT prep, study hall. There's a big variety of afternoon enrichment, which is just from the time from 4 o'clock to dinner time. For me, I do a lot of sports managing, and so I've managed football, basketball, softball, and it also like it's just nice because I don't play any sports, so I just get to be a part of the athletics, which is great for me. And I also have prefect duties where at nighttime I'll be on duty in the dorms like Davis, or I'll be on weekend duty, or leading an activity, or even just a big meeting with the girls or even guys too. For us this year, it changed, so we have a set number of times we can leave. It's a little bit more for seniors, and then for lower classmen, it's not as much. You can go to a friend's house, you can for the whole weekend, or you can go home for the whole weekend, or you can also take county leaves. I think it's twice on the weekend, and then just for seniors one time during the week, where you can go, but not during the school day. Like it's only from 5:30 to 7:45, where you can like go out to dinner or something like that. Well, I'll start with my favorite classes. They're not necessarily my favorite teachers, but I really enjoy econ this year. I actually feel like that class relates what we're doing to real world experience and things that I actually need to know for my future years. And I really enjoy just math classes. Probably one of my favorite class was Calculus AB with Mr. Schaefer. It was just really fun, and I felt like I actually understood the class. And sometimes I just got up and I didn't really teach the class, but I led the class. Like we would go over problems, and I'd be the one that was standing up there and writing stuff on the board. And it just made me feel like really accomplished in a way. I felt like I knew the material well, and I could teach other people, which is something I really enjoy. I really enjoy helping others, and that was kind of how I found my passion for helping others and things like that. Okay. And so my favorite teachers would probably be Mr. L.R. Smith, of course. he's from North Carolina, so we kind of have that connection. And his class was just really entertaining and fun. I'm not a big history fan, but I just liked the environment when I walked into his classroom. I really liked how he keeps traditions going. We still have trapping today. My freshman year and sophomore year, we trapped, and it was a lot of fun. I also feel like that was the best way to learn, best way to attain the information. And another one of my favorite teachers is Mr. Feldbrugge. He just really connects with his students, and he leads chapel sometimes and does devotions, and he also has impacted my relationship with the Lord. He's really impacted me on that a lot. He's helped me through many things, and his wife also worked here, and she was a big part of my life. So their whole family, I'm still very close with them. And another one of my favorite teachers is Mr. Barrett. This is my first year having him. I babysat his kids a lot, so I knew him from that. And then also once I got into his classroom, like I said, I didn't really enjoy the actual class. I'm not a big English person, but I just like him as a person, and he makes English enjoyable. The honor code is still very strong today. We take it very seriously. We still have an honor council, which is made up of just students, and that is honestly my biggest fear, is going to the honor council. I never want to go to the honor council. And I really just think that's what makes Webb Webb. It really stood out to me when I came here, and then when I actually got into class and was hearing about all the honor council cases and pledging my work. At first I was like, I'm not really sure how I feel about it, but once I got into it, I really appreciate it, and I'm really glad that this school has the very impactful and strong honor code. And with helping me through my later years, I think it just builds character, and I think it's just gonna keep making me a better person.
Okay, and since you have your education, higher education and your life in front of you, what are your future plans? Do you have your sights set?
I definitely plan to go to college. Not sure really what I want to do or where I really want to go in life, but I am only 17 years old, so I still have a whole life ahead of me. There are definitely some memories that I'll have from Webb. One that's most prevalent and sticks out is my freshman year. There was a snowstorm, and we were supposed to be on fall break, but we ended up getting that whole week out of school, but we had to sleep in the library because the power went out in Rand, and it was miserable, but it's just something you remember and you'll never forget. And I made friends, and I've talked to people that I would have never talked to if that didn't happen.